think a lot about and that you're focused on investing in. But right now, as we have some offices going back full time, I'm still broadcasting from home. A lot of people are entering a hybrid work environment. How do you think about investing in the future of work when the future seems kind of uncertain?
Absolutely. I'd start with it's what you said, which is we have so much change that's been accelerated by the pandemic, but much of it was going to happen anyway. It's just happened in this like generational once in a lifetime event. And that dump truck of problem statements, it's going to stay with us, right? The genie is not going to go back in the bottle now that people realize they can work digital first. So we try to think about that across all of the dimensions, like the future of work. It is everything from HR, how you manage talent that is more flexible, how you recruit in a world where like your culture and how engaged your employees is more important than ever. It's about supporting people from a full life cycle perspective, where investors in companies like Lyra and Clio on the benefits side, to rethinking we have this great resignation, this tight labor market. There are all these knock-on effects that we believe are coming around, for example, education for work. What is retraining that works more for workers? And so I think we definitely think about the short term of just like, how do we continue to be productive in a more hybrid world, which we think is definitely going to stay. But also, if this is true, it's really a very big generational change. And how should businesses approach it differently? So we don't know what the exact answer is for people's return to work supposed plans when we've all been working for the last 2 years, as far as I can tell. But assuming this change is dynamic but permanent, we're investing aggressively against that.
Yeah, we shouldn't call it the return to work. We should call it the return to the office. But so it sounds like the thesis really is that hybrid, at home and office is here to stay. And also, it sounds like you think that employees will have more leverage going forward and will be able to demand and will be able to get better, whether it's benefits or better education. So I want to break this down into sort of the different pieces. Why don't you tell me a little bit about sort of how the labor market and the employee benefits fit into this? What are the companies you're investing in that are really focused on employees?
Absolutely. So I think most of my companies are thinking about how to enable users or how to manage your people differently. Very directly in things people would consider HR software, we have companies such as GEM, which treats the talent relationship like a relationship. Traditional recruiting software, it's really about the workflow of, how do I reach out? How do I put somebody through an interview cycle? How do I make sure they're, connected into the future HR system like Workday for onboarding? But GEM really says, we have a bunch of people in the world that we want to keep track of. We want to understand where they are in their careers, and we want to communicate with them and catch them at the right time and like really understand them from a data perspective in an automated way. And we think that's going to give companies a really big advantage in the tight labor market that is around knowledge workers today, especially, but all classes of worker. We're also investors in a company called Utmost, which helps you manage a global extended workforce. So if you take an example like Tesla, Tesla obviously has its own really large workforce, but they're also powered by technicians from their parts suppliers. They have an IT team that comes through a staffing firm. They have contractors for marketing and all sorts of functions. They have alumni, all the people who have worked for Tesla with incredible understanding that might return to the workforce after a stint caregiving, for example, right? And I think companies haven't really thought strategically about that entire span of people that might work for CNBC or Tesla, and it's really more of a web of work getting done. And so the pandemic has really caused companies to focus on understanding and better leveraging that workforce. And Utmost is a system that helps you manage that.
So interesting. And now tell me a little bit about sort of communication in this new hybrid world. I know you've invested in a company called Figma. There are a lot of platforms that have existed for a while. And we could talk about Slack, Microsoft Teams that have been obviously used perhaps more during this time. But where do you see that communication and those collaboration tools going from here?
Yeah, so this has been a long-standing, deeply held belief at Greylock that to some degree, all next-generation business software is actually collaboration software, right? So Figma is absolutely a great example of this. You should take a look at their product, FigJam, which is really about communication for teams rather than just creativity for design. But if you think about our companies like Dropbox, Quip, Coda, Shortcut, Remotion, Like all of these companies, they help people individually get work done, but they really take into account the fact that teams are getting work done in businesses and creating communication channels where the work is happening. So we think that's going to happen more and more, and we're continuing to invest there.
Yeah, when I think about people working from home, obviously that opens the door to so many more cybersecurity risks. And the past year has also been full of revelations about just how dramatic cyber risks are for every size company, government, et cetera. What is your thesis on cybersecurity, and where do you see the most opportunity from here?
Yeah, it's the thesis is as simple as we are going to do more and more on the internet and in software and in secure computing. The digital first world is growing faster than security, right? And so we want to invest in companies that are helping individuals, consumers, and businesses keep up and protect themselves against the fastest growing, most important threat vectors. I think the unfortunate thing is those threat vectors, like we're particularly interested in email, SaaS permissions, since everybody's SaaS first in the hybrid world, ransomware, because it has such a impact on availability of businesses, and it's a really good business model for attackers in terms of being able to extract direct dollars versus considering whether or not businesses care about brand reputation. We think about those attack vectors, and then we look for teams that we feel like have differentiated approaches against those attack vectors that businesses should feel are critical, right? So, Abnormal is an AI approach to email security. Rubrik is a storage approach to ransomware, where they actually hold your data such that you can't have it locked by some attacker. And Obsidian is also an AI approach to SaaS data, and so. We're really trying to follow like the environmental change that's happening in terms of the data center to this cloud world, and then the attacker innovation. The final thing where we're continuing to invest, and we have several companies, is this area of, you said it well, Julia, technology is just becoming more important to every business. And the supply chain of how people produce their own software and technology is not very well understood. It's very complex, right? And complexity is the enemy of security. And so helping companies think about how to develop more secure software with companies like Apiro and others is something we'll continue to invest in as well.
Yeah, it seems like that category is sure to grow. Sarah, you mentioned SaaS a number of times. What's your broader thesis when it comes to SaaS investments? It's such a broad space right now. I mean, SaaS almost feels like it's this umbrella term for so many different things happening between it, inside of it. And I think a lot of your security investments would fall under that umbrella. But are there other pieces of the SaaS landscape that you think have a lot of potential right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about two things, like why I think it is such a large opportunity, and then one area I'm super excited about. This obviously has a lot of overlap with the future of work as well. I think the future of work is going to be in SaaS, but one reason we continue to be really excited about SaaS is if you look back to 1980, the total market cap of technology as an ecosystem was 50 billion. Right. Now, if you look at 2020, it's about 32 trillion. Right. So the acceleration of tech market cap overall and how many businesses are technology driven is just undeniable. And then we look at why is that happening? It's because digital businesses are better able to compete and better able to run. And so if you think about how that's happening, you can either build your own software or you can use and configure software somebody else has built for you. And the penetration of software has just not reached every function and every industry. And so when we think about where is the additional opportunity in software, it used to be that enterprise software served a really tiny set of people, certain key functions in very large enterprises, right? So think like the head of sales or the head of finance in a Fortune 500 company. And we think the future opportunity for SaaS is both like down market, so SMB, mid-market, many verticals. So restaurants, small businesses, real world companies that couldn't afford the complexity of traditional enterprise software before.
Mhm.
And then there's this other vector of like, well, we can build software much more efficiently now, and distribute it more efficiently over the web. So it doesn't have to be, $1 million a year. And these other businesses can afford this much cheaper but valuable software. And then the other vector is that SaaS will actually do more for you, right? Instead of it being, let's say, take the most traditional example of just your financial system. Instead of it being a place where you hold your accounting data and make sure you have the ledger for closing your quarter as a company, have to do that. It can do that much more intelligently, right?
Mhm.
It will take burden off of the accounting and finance team with automation, or it can manage transactions between you and other businesses, and it's as much fintech as it is SaaS. So we think there's a lot of incremental opportunity from here because the market for SaaS is expanding.
Yeah, you mentioned fintech. We have talked so much about the impact of fintech on consumer behavior, and fintech is a consumer tool, but it also is related to these small and medium sized business, even large business. So, what is your perspective on how the surge in fintech is going to be impacting the rest of the business landscape? I have to point out that you've invested in Coinbase, among others.
Absolutely. We think the ability to do transactions online cheaply, and that could be in consumer fintech, it could be in crypto in the future, it could be business to business. That is incredibly valuable and powerful, right? And the way we think of it is just like, what is the tax? The human tax, and the business tax on doing business, like having these transactions happen manually today. And if you just take a really simple example of a small business invoices they're working with a vendor, there's an invoice process. People on multiple sides are like writing checks and emailing PDFs and making sure that those amounts match in their financial system. I think removing that tax burden of the waste of time, and then the traditional financial system cost of sending this money around is actually hugely powerful, right? And so
Yeah.
I think we've seen the rise of these consumer payment systems, and we'll see more and more on the business side, but we're a shade behind.
Yeah. Before we have to go, I want to make sure to get your perspective on seed investing and early stage venture capital. I mean, Greylock recently raised $500 million for seed investing, the largest pool of capital dedicated to such early stage investing. How do you approach investing in these early stage companies right now? And how has your perspective changed because of this weird hybrid world that we're now living in? I mean, you're making investments for many, many years in the future.
I think it goes back to where we started, Julia, which is we see more opportunity than ever, right? We're going from 0 to 2 billion internet connected people over the last 40 years. And like, we don't think that's a trend that's going to reverse, right? And so when we see this much opportunity, and we also see a gap in the market, despite all the capital in the venture and the technology ecosystem right now, the number of partners that are really focused on taking this level of risk and then being active partners, we think is few, right? And so when we see that gap in the market, we want to supply it, and we're really excited about many of these opportunities. I think when you talk about investing many years in the future, we do fundamentally believe a lot of these changes were coming. I won't say that I could have predicted or anybody could have predicted that 2020 was the year that we all worked from home, but the idea that we were going to go digital first, that's been happening for a long time. And an example would be one of our companies that's since progressed to be an important platform company, Okta. They were talking about the idea of dynamic work, before the pandemic happened. Right. And so I think if we follow the leadership in these areas, we really just believe many of these changes are going to be permanent, and we're continuing to listen to leaders about how they address it, but we're not going back to normal.
It's just been an acceleration of trends that you were already looking at and that were already in the works. Sarah, it's so fascinating to get your perspective on all of these things. And we're excited for the Disruptor 50 Summit and to get to talk about all of this more later today. We tackled fintech, SaaS, cybersecurity, and the future of work. We really appreciate your insight. Sarah Guo, partner at Greylock.